learning more about new reports coming out of Mexico that female assassins are now working for the cartel. A Mexican television station capturing the women on the move, wearing tactical gear and armed with assault rifles.
From brutally torturing people for information to slaughtering innocent people in cold blood, there are some infamous female cartel leaders who had far deadlier reputations than many of the men. On the outside, many of these women appeared young, innocent, and beautiful, but in reality they were cold, calculated, and unforgiving. They used their charm to lure men to their deaths. They dismembered bodies without a second thought and drank the blood of their victims. They took pleasure in murder and enjoyed the sound of the screams of their victims. These are some of the toughest female narcos who murdered just for the fun of it. Maria Guadalupe Lopez Esquivel, better known by her cartel title, La Katrina, is often said to have been one of the most beautiful cartel leaders of all time, but she was also one of the most evil. La Katrina was not someone who was used to being told no. She got what she wanted, and if she didn't, people paid, often with their lives. La Katrina was born into a life of poverty in Tepocatepec, Mexico. Her father was a farmer, and her family often struggled to make ends meet. From a very young age, La Katrina knew that she didn't want to be poor her whole life. She was going to make something of herself, and she didn't care what she had to do in order to make that happen. When she was just a teenager, La Katrina ended up leaving her family and home behind to go after something bigger. She would end up meeting a very dangerous man whose influence would lead her down a very dark path that would ultimately cost her everything. That man was Miguel LM2 Fernandez, and he was a prominent member of the Jalisco New Generation cartel. This cartel, started by the infamous drug kingpin El Mencho, is among one of the deadliest organizations of all time. They are known for being absolutely ruthless when it comes to getting their way, and aren't afraid to sacrifice innocent lives when it comes to the good of the cartel.
Fueling America's bottomless demand for drugs, Jalisco New Generation Cartel, known as CJNG, is now considered the most dangerous and fastest growing drug cartel in the world.
To La Katrina, the viciousness of the cartel made it all the more appealing. Through her connection to M2, she quickly became a member and began swiftly climbing the ranks. She may have been small in size, but it took no time for her to prove that she was fiercely tough and absolutely deadly. She became a sicaria, or hit woman, and earned the title La Katrina because she was literally a symbol representing death. Many foolish men underestimated La Katrina and usually paid the price with their lives. She was a fearless leader who led large groups of hitmen through bloody battles. She managed to pull off countless kidnappings, extortions, and murders.
Could be a very pretty girl that you say, oh, there's no way to go work for the cartel. Or if she does work for the cartel, she's definitely not a killer. And then they find out that that's not the case.
It wasn't just rival gang members who faced the wrath of La Katrina. It was anyone who dared to get in her way. This included law enforcement, officers, politicians, and yes, sometimes innocent people. La Katrina became totally consumed by the cartel lifestyle and all it had to offer. She used social media to flaunt her lavish lifestyle and, of course, show off her huge arsenal of weapons. Even though M2 had introduced La Katrina to the cartel lifestyle, she had very quickly become much more famous and feared than he ever was. She was a seemingly unstoppable force that fellow cartel members respected. In October of 2019, La Katrina was part of an ambush that included 30 heavily armed cartel members. Mexican cops were issuing a warrant and never saw the ambush coming. The result was incredibly gruesome. 13 officers were killed and 9 more were injured. Law enforcement would later discover that La Katrina was one of the key figures of the ambush. She had hired a big group of halcones, or informants, to gather information that she would need to pull off the attack. At this point, there was too much blood on La Katrina's hands. It was only a matter of time before her deadly lifestyle was going to catch up with her. The Mexican Army, National Guard, and Michoacan state law enforcement would end up joining forces to take down La Katrina once and for all. After many months, they were finally able to track her down. She was hiding out in La Bocanada, a small town in Michoacan. The cops wanted to take her into custody peacefully, but of course, that's not what happened. The situation soon escalated to a gunfight, and La Katrina was struck in the neck by a bullet.
Tranquila, mija, ya viene el helicóptero por ti. Ya viene el helicóptero. Tranquila, hija, tranquila. Vas a estar bien. Trata de aguantar, ¿eh?
A helicopter arrived to take La Katrina to the hospital, but it was too late. She died before it even landed. The news of her death spread quickly, with many celebrating the takedown of one of the cartel's most notorious killers. Claudia Ooa Felix was a glamorous young woman who became famous within the cartel for working alongside El Chapo. Claudia was the leader of the assassin group Anthrax and earned the title the Empress of Anthrax. Like La Katrina, Claudia loved social media and used it to flaunt her wealth and luxurious lifestyle. She even became known as the Kim Kardashian of the cartel because of her glamorous appearance and constant online posting. Claudia began dating Jose Rodrigo Arechiga Gamboa, aka El Chino Anthrax, the original founder of Los Anthrax. This relationship helped her to continue to rise through the ranks of the cartel and gain even more power. Throughout her life, Claudia was constantly denying rumors that she was involved in the cartel. However, every social media post seemed to suggest otherwise. From designer clothing labels to lavish jewelry, there was no hiding the fact that she was rolling in cash. Then, there was her massive weapon arsenal. Claudia loved her firearms and wasn't afraid to show it. Her social media was filled with her displaying her different deadly weapons proudly. By 2019, the authorities were on to Claudia. It seemed like only a matter of time before she was going to be arrested. However, in a shocking twist, it wasn't the cops who took down Claudia, but drugs. In September of 2019, a man who had been sleeping next to Claudia woke up and found her unresponsive. He called 911, and when EMS arrived, they confirmed that she was dead. An autopsy revealed that she had taken many different substances before her death, which eventually caused organ failure. The overdose was ruled accidental. It was a tragic but very surprising way for this glamorous killer's life to come to an end. Maria Guadalupe Jimenez Lopez, one of the deadliest assassins in Mexican history, was called La Tosca, or the Rough One. She worked for the Los Zetas cartel, who are notorious for their brutal tactics. They are especially known for their obsession with violence and torture. It comes as no surprise that as a member of Los Zetas, Maria was absolutely evil to the core and was responsible for at least 20 different murders. However, for a long time, she managed to completely evade law enforcement. The cops did not suspect her because she was a woman. No one expected for a female to be a part of such a bloody and violent section of the cartel. But once her dark identity was revealed, the cops quickly caught up with her. Maria confessed to everything, admitting that she was paid 10,000 pesos, or $1,500 a month for her work as an assassin. She became one of the most trusted enforcers within Los Zetas and was responsible for the murder of several prominent people. During her time working for the cartel, Maria took part in everything from kidnapping and extortion to dismembering the bodies of her victims. She was ultimately sentenced to life in prison, where she remains to this day. Sandra Avala Beltran, known as the Queen of the Pacific, was born on October 11, 1960, into the powerful Sinaloa cartel. Sandra never stood a chance at getting to have a normal life. Her mother's family were drug smugglers, and her father was a prominent figure in the Guadalajara cartel. Sandra was exposed to the cartel world's violence and corruption from pretty much the day she was born. She witnessed her first out at the age of 13, and before she was 14, she was already helping out with cartel activities. Her first job was helping to count money for her father, but it wouldn't be long before her activities escalated and became much more violent. Sandra got to enjoy the many benefits that working for the cartel had to offer her. She got a private education and lived a luxurious life, complete with piano lessons, dance classes, and trips to Disneyland. But Sandra's violent lifestyle left her with scars. She didn't know what it was like to live a normal, non-criminal lifestyle. Sandra quickly rose through the ranks of the cartel, becoming an expert money launderer and overseeing illegal drug shipments to the United States. Her relationships were mostly strategic and not based on romance. She was even rumored to have dated El Chapo himself. Because of her fame, Sandra had a huge target on her back and was still a teenager when she survived her first assassination attempt.
De un momento se atravesó un carro, nos cerró el paso y se bajaron dos personas armadas. Se nos pusieron de frente y empezaron a... Inició el tiroteo. La persona que me iba siguiendo armada trató de salir corriendo para que no lo tuviera y lo detienen cuando él trata de salir. Es como yo me salvo.
By the end of the 20th century, Sandra was operating within the cartel on a massive scale. She was handling millions of dollars and living a life of luxury with a fleet of private jets, mansions, and extravagant parties. Her success in connecting Mexican and Colombian cartels earned her the nickname, the Queen of the Pacific. But of course, the cops were hot on Sandra's tail, and she couldn't avoid them forever. In 2007, she was finally arrested and extradited to the US, where she pleaded guilty to cocaine trafficking charges.
Con un semblante visiblemente molesto, la llamada Reina del Pacífico reiteró que Calderón es quien debe estar preso por corrupto y que si hablara de cuántas personas se han enriquecido de manera ilegal, 2 primeras damas ya estarían tras las rejas.
¿Sabes a cuántas mujeres se llevarían si hablan de lavado de dinero?
Sandra was sentenced to 70 months behind bars. As soon as she got out, she went back to being somewhat of a celebrity, but in a different way than before. She became a well-known TikTok creator, posting about her former life in the cartel and beauty routines. Melissa Margarita Calderon Ojeda, aka La China, was a brutal and feared cartel leader who shocked even her male counterparts with her excessive violence. Born on August 12, 1984, she decided early on that she would rise to the top of the cartel world. By 2005, she had joined the Damaso cartel, a subdivision of the Sinaloa cartel, and took on the nickname La China. Her leadership style was defined by extreme brutality. She was viewed as far more fierce and deranged as even her male partners. La China believed that if she wanted to be respected in a world that was primarily dominated by men, she would have to be even more ruthless than they are. She had no problem doing just that.
There is a tendency for women to be more violent than men so that the men who are around them will take them seriously.
By 2008, she was the commander of the Damaso cartel's armed unit. Under her command, violence in the areas under her control skyrocketed. She became known for kidnapping, extorting, and torturing her victims. She would even leave dismembered bodies as a message to rival cartels and authorities. Her reign of terror was responsible for at least 178 deaths. In 2014, La China's boyfriend Eric was murdered by El Grande, the leader of the Damaso cartel. This was basically a strategic power move that was used to try to push La China out of power. This only fueled La China's rage, and she swore she would get revenge. La China ended up forming her own cartel, Las Fuerzas, with her new boyfriend, Hector Pedro Camarino Gomez, aka El Chino. But eventually, her relentless violence became too much. Even for him, he betrayed her and turned her over to the authorities. La China was arrested, bringing an end to her violent reign. She is currently serving a life sentence behind bars. Magdalena Solace wasn't a cartel leader, but her horrifying crimes still left a deep mark on Mexican history. Her story begins in Tamaulipas, Mexico, in 1947. She came from a poor and dysfunctional family, and her life was incredibly sad and disturbing. When Magdalena was still a child, she was forced by her brother to sell herself for money. When you consider what a traumatizing childhood this must have been, it's really not surprising how dark and twisted her life would later become. For years, Magdalena was leading a cult in a cave in the Sierra Madre Mountains. She was running the cult alongside 2 brothers, Santos and Cayetano Hernandez, who were petty criminals. They had basically convinced the local illiterate villagers that they were prophets and high priests of the ancient and powerful Inca gods. The brothers promised the villagers that by worshiping them and offering them tribute, they would be led to hidden treasure in the surrounding mountains. In order to keep this whole ruse going, the brother pretended that Magdalena was an incarnated Inca goddess, sent to lead the villagers to prosperity and power. Magdalena introduced ritualistic blood sacrifices as a way to maintain control over her followers. The villagers participated in blood rituals, where chosen heretics within the group were tortured, killed, and mutilated. In some instances, she reportedly drank the blood of the victims in front of the other cult members. All of this was to help even further paint her as a powerful, bloodthirsty goddess. It wasn't until May of 1963 when a 14-year-old boy named Sebastian Guerrero stumbled upon one of the group's rituals. While exploring the mountains, he was, of course, horrified by what he saw, which was people being tortured and sacrificed. He ran to the nearest law enforcement station and reported the incident, claiming to have witnessed vampires in the cave. Understandably, the cops pretty much dismissed Sebastian at first, that he was just some little kid trying to pull a prank. But when he continued to insist that he was telling the truth, an officer named Luis Martinez agreed to accompany him back to the cave to investigate. Tragically, both Sebastian and Officer Martinez were captured and killed when they returned to investigate. But the discovery of their bodies was enough to finally convince the cops that they had to start taking this whole thing seriously. When authorities raided the cult's hideout, they engaged in a deadly shootout with the Hernandez brothers and their followers. Many of the cult members, including the brothers, were killed during the confrontation. However, Magdalena survived and was taken into custody. After her arrest, Magdalena was charged with several murders, though it's believed that the true number of her victims was much higher than what was officially recorded. She was sentenced to 50 years behind bars and remains one of the most ruthless and notorious cult leaders of all time. While each of these notorious female narcos' reigns eventually came to an end, there are many more who are still in power right now. In fact, some of these women are operating on a much bigger scale, and their number of victims is even higher. Who will go down in history as this generation's most ruthless sicaria? Only time will tell.